Julia Boorstin here. I am so excited to share the latest episode of CNBC's Changemakers and Power Players. Sophie Goldschmidt, president and CEO of U.S. Ski and Snowboard, is reinventing what an Olympic sports organization can be. It's why we named her a 2026 CNBC Changemaker. She grew up in the shadow of Wimbledon, with professional tennis players literally staying at her house during the tournament. That sparked a lifelong obsession with sports, which eventually led her to the top of U.S. Ski and Snowboard. There, she's more than doubled revenue to $70 million and turned a traditional institution into a lifestyle brand. I loved hearing her playbook for driving change and why she's so bullish on the future of women's sports. Take a listen to my frank conversation with Sophie Goldschmidt in the Changemakers and Power Players Spotlight. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. We're so thrilled to get to honor you as a CNBC Changemaker. You have done so much for the U.S. ski and snowboard team, really revitalized it, not only made it part of the public conversation, but dramatically increased its business reach with all sorts of incredible partnerships. Since you've been there, you've driven so much change. I want to start with this idea of your vision for change. How do you think about changing this old institution?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have to say, look, coming into this role, I wasn't quite sure what the appetite was going to be. People had managed to convince me that there were absolutely certain areas that we could transform and that I would get support for that. But, you're always a little bit nervous, especially in, the sports sector. I think there's a lot of traditional sort of culture and maybe change is harder also because you have so many different stakeholders that you need to get on board. But I have to say I've been pleasantly surprised, or actually I should say really what I hoped would be the case has been the case. And people have really been very open-minded and embraced the opportunity to improve in various areas. I should note, look, a lot of areas were going very well and it was kind of more of the same there. But I did feel that there were various areas both on and off the snow, if I can put it that way, that were ripe for disruption that we could really improve. And so, yeah, look, it's been quite a few years that we've had. I should also note it's been a huge team effort. As you know, you need so many different parts of an organization, different stakeholders to really buy in to make, fundamental change happen. But it's been really rewarding. And look, hopefully we're still just getting going. I feel like we've got a long way to go.
Well, when you look at sort of how Olympic teams usually work, there's usually, especially for Winter Olympic teams, there's usually a big surge during the Olympics and then revenue drops off and there's this cycle. But you seem to have broken the cycle. I've seen the numbers, or I've seen the reports about the numbers, 70 million in revenue for the 2026 fiscal year. That's more than double the 32 million from 2022. What have you done to not only boost revenue, but also smooth things out so it's not so jagged?
Yeah, so one of my sort of observations starting with this role was actually how much we have control over in our broader ecosystem. Unlike I think quite a lot of other national governing bodies or sports properties, which can be quite fragmented. When you do a partnership, you have to have a separate agreement with the broadcaster, separate one with the events. You need to, agree with teams or the players union. Whereas uniquely with us, we all sit in the same ecosystem. So that gives us a lot of flexibility to craft, I think, really innovative partnerships and develop a different kind of proposition that people can buy into. And one thing that also became apparent to me, while the Olympics and Paralympics are a huge moment, an opportunity every 4 years, actually, we don't directly control them in the way that we do the rest of our assets, if I can put it that way. So in some ways, actually, Olympic year is a little bit of a down year from a commercial perspective because we don't have as many events in the US. The athletes aren't wearing the same uniforms. They don't have the same kind of commercial flexibility during an Olympic Games. Look, clearly there's plenty of upside, and the profile and attention that our sports and athletes get definitely helps to kind of turbocharge what we're doing. But because of that, yeah, we don't see a big spike. And actually, I would hope going into next year, don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but I think we'll see, more growth going into next season because we can kind of control our outcome and our destiny a little bit more. We'll go back to having more World Cups again. We'll have more broadcast exposure because we don't have this sort of 3 to 4 week gap during a prime part of our season where, yes, we benefit, but not so much commercially. So look, look, in the past, we did sort of see a bit of a dip after an Olympics, but I think this change in strategy and approach means that actually, if we do our jobs, then we can continue to grow year over year.
Yeah, it's so interesting how much has changed since you've taken over. You brought in a bunch of new sponsors, ranging from banks like Stifel to Dunkin' with coffee and donuts. And then you also have done some of these interesting partnerships, like one that I made a purchase from, which was the J. Crew partnership, selling apparel inspired by the team. Do you think you've just taken, explain your strategy. Have you taken a broader approach to these kinds of partnerships?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think around sort of our core proposition, it was just getting more innovative. We've added more events. We've doubled the number of World Cups that we've now got in the US, which is, I think, a big driver for a lot of this growth. We're doing a lot more on the marketing content side of things. We are getting more flexible with how we interact with our athletes. You know, they are our most important partner. I wanted them to feel the same way. So the way that they've bought into these different opportunities, the access we have to them, the appearances they're doing, etc., I think has really gone to a new level. But I think another key thing for me was just how we were positioning ourselves. And I feel I can say this quite credibly, having worked in a lot of different sports that cross over into lifestyle, whether it's surfing, golf, tennis, etc. But snow sports transcend into lifestyle, I can say, better than any other sport. And so I've really tried to lean into that. I think they are so aspirational. We're in these beautiful places with these athletes doing superhuman things. People care more about the outdoors and adventure these days. And we were really previously just talking about ourselves as just a very narrow, high-performing, athlete-focused organization. The athletes are at the core of everything we do. They always will be. But we have a much broader story and way that people can connect with us. And J. Crew was a perfect example of that. So they're really focused on what's happening off the mountain, the lifestyle appeal. If we think about après and everything that goes with that. Also, our demographic is broad and quite diverse, but is on the premium side as well. So being able to tap into more of that luxury and premium kind of area and appeal to those categories. So I think that has been quite a shift. And the good news is you can do both.
Yeah.
You know, we've got different logos, we've got different ways that we can bring that to life. But I think strategically that was an important move and has been, you know, really well received by our partners as well.
I thought it was so interesting that you launched this luxury travel and hospitality program. Tell us a little bit about that. This is totally different than anything I've heard about before with any similar team.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it was something I've been thinking about for a little while, and it came off the back of just seeing how well we do with our donor program when we call them championship club programs that we do around the Olympics and Paralympics. We do them around World Championships. You actually had a chance to experience what we do in Birds of Prey in some of our World Cup events, but we don't ever really offer those.
As an aside, I got to go to the Birds of Prey competition, the Birds of Prey event, and I got to interview Peekaboo Street there, which was incredible. So anyways, that
was awesome. We were privileged to have you there. And yeah, we saw just the interest that we were getting. We were oversubscribed for those programs, but we weren't offering them to anyone outside of kind of our stakeholder group, so our donors and partners. And yet, you know, they sold out in days. So I'm like, hang on a second, there's close to 20 million skiers and snowboarders in the US that don't even know that these opportunities exist. So let's take a bet and launch a business where it's not just offered to our immediate group, that we can allow others to participate in these amazing experiences. And they're both in the US and also we're doing some in Europe as well. So we launched the program last year and it's been going great. We'll have a much fuller schedule this coming season. But yeah, fully encourage people to give those trips a go because you get to see the best in the world competing in these amazing locations, but this behind the scenes experience, which look, we've seen from Formula One, tennis, other events, that high-end premium opportunity is going from strength to strength. I think the difference for us is you can actually participate as well. We can have someone ski down a race course right before the athletes are competing. They can meet the athletes afterwards. They can be in that environment. You know, it's quite hard to go play golf at the Masters, you know, on the morning of before the players are teeing off. Whereas for us, we can really max the participation up with that competitive experience. So early days, but yeah, it's going very well so far.
Yeah, fascinating just seeing how much the organization has changed in terms of its brand and also the way fans get to participate in that. But I want to rewind and go back to your childhood because you grew up in the shadow of Wimbledon. And to think about how your life has been shaped by sport, I'm curious what it was like to grow up in the area with this iconic tennis tournament and how
Yeah,
that
look,
shaped you.
yeah, feel very fortunate, and still often people think that's actually a place you can live there. It's not just the centre court and the tournament. So yeah, I was very fortunate to grow up. It's a great suburb of London. And look, I grew up in quite a sporty family, not sort of in a pushy way. My parents actually were quite relaxed about us playing sport, but encouraged us to be active. They thought it was a good thing for us to do. So I grew up playing a lot of different sports, but I did lean into tennis from a pretty early age. And one of the ways I got exposed to it was we used to have players come stay at our house. So especially sort of the juniors and qualifying, they don't want them staying in tournaments, and often you have to stay in central London and it's not that convenient. So we used to have coaches and players stay with us. So that gave me a whole nother view of what professional tennis was like. Then I had the chance to play and really became quite obsessed with it. I mean, that was my obsession growing up from sort of an early teen. Tennis was a big part of my life and sort of opened my eyes to the sports world, although little did I really know what that might lead to. But from there, it actually got me over to the States. I came over for college on a tennis scholarship. And that, yeah, was a huge opportunity. I can say firsthand, look, I would not have had the same opportunities if I'd started my career back in the UK. So, yeah, growing up in Wimbledon and tennis, I have a lot to be thankful to them both for.
So going back to this idea that you had athletes and coaches stay at your house during Wimbledon, during the tournament, do you have any particular memories of those interactions or when your eyes opened to how powerful these kinds of massive sporting events could be or that you wanted to be part of it?
Yeah, I think sort of pros and cons. I just remember seeing the commitment and dedication. These athletes were up early, preparing, getting ready, talking to their coaches, training, coming back, training again. And it was sort of relentless. They would come for 2 or 3 weeks before the event. So that was definitely an eye-opener, and getting to go to the tournament, sort of seeing a little bit more the behind the scenes. So it wasn't just the coaching and on-court side. It was who was, putting on the practice facilities, who was arranging the transportation, even arranging where they were going to stay, etc. So that was fascinating to learn about. I also learned just how tough it was. We had multiple players staying with us over many years, and very few of them made it past the second or third round. Occasionally one got far, and that was super cool. But just seeing, they trained and put so much in for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they were done. First day of the tournament, they're out. And okay, maybe there isn't another tournament for another couple of weeks. So then, they're just trying to stay motivated and train and stay sort of in the zone to continue to improve. But it was tough. A lot of them lost close matches. They were devastated. Often their families were dependent on them. So they were traveling with families, and you sort of felt that pressure, especially with the women who tended to be younger, especially some of the stars were 16, 17, 18. And they were, looking after their whole family. They had, a big entourage with them. And you kind of felt that pressure when it didn't go well. So I think that was a good reality check. With these individual sports, there's only one winner. On a weekend, or with Wimbledon, it's over a 2-week event.
Yeah.
And so a lot go away disappointed and back to the grind of, trying to do better the following week.
So there's so much research about women and sports and how women who have been athletes, especially high school and college, go on to, they're more likely to become CEOs or leaders. And you're certainly a perfect example of that. But there are all these interesting things that you get from sports. And one of them is a frequent exposure to losing. And this idea that it's not just about playing with a team. And certainly tennis isn't about a team. But it's this idea that you're going to win, you're going to lose. You're going to watch the tape. You're going to see what you could have done better. And I wonder what you feel like you learned as a leader from watching this. I mean, it's incredible hearing how hard you saw it was, and the fact that you also still wanted to lean into that despite the fact that it was so hard and tough.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, look, if you're someone that is into self-development and improvement, as well as, have those competitive instincts, then, being part of a sport is such a great way to grow up. I mean, I feel fortunate too, having come then to college in the States, I actually got to be part of a team. Before that, tennis was just an individual sport for me. Yes, you have friends and you're traveling with others, but every day you're competing against someone individually. Whereas when you come to college in the States, you are winning individually, but it's part of a team. Ultimately, you've, as a team, got to get so many points to win the overall match. So I love that, actually. I mean, that gave me sort of a whole new perspective and sort of motivated me in a different way. So I was glad that I got to experience that. But yeah, I mean, it definitely teaches what we know, sort of resiliency, determination, for sure, how to deal with losses in an overall match, but even point by point. I mean, Federer had that fantastic speech at Dartmouth a few years ago where, he articulated even someone like that who's been incredibly successful. Throughout his career, he almost won as many points as he lost. And so how you recover from point to point and can move on, take the learnings quickly. And it is good to get disappointed. I mean, I still, even in the role I'm in now, where we oversee, close to 300 athletes. So on a daily basis, a few are winning and a lot are struggling. And I like to see them being disappointed, not in a way that's going to, put them in a bad place for very long, but you want to feel that pain and just how much it means and sort of that intensity to want to get better. So I think, these are all great traits for just broader life. And, one more recently that's really hit me too, which I don't think I fully appreciated, was also, especially with individual sports, but also team sports, just how coachable athletes are when they go into the real world post their career. And I think, often, especially, maybe with the young generation, it's sometimes quite hard to give feedback and be really direct. With athletes, it's not. They're craving it. They just want constant feedback, how I can do better. Where did I make a mistake? And you don't need to overly think and position it. And I think that's a quality I have in a small way. But I think I expect it has helped me quite a lot during my career.
So after playing college tennis at Baylor, you made your professional doubles debut in 1991, and then you suffered this injury that really cut your career short, your professional tennis career short. What was that moment like, and how do you think it changed you as a business leader?
Yeah, so very sort of early stage professional career. I actually see it as a positive. I think I wasn't going to be good enough to make it at the highest levels, but probably would have spent a bit more time trying. So it was a blessing in disguise, and the injury, reset my path. I was able to keep playing at a decent level and was able to play in college, but it meant I had to dig in and focus on my degree and what else was next. And look, again, having this passion already for sports, I was sort of more inclined to look at those opportunities. It was a time when sport was beginning to boom. Women's sports was really just getting going. So, yeah, look, I'm grateful for the timing of it, and it opened a whole nother world to me, which, I have learned so much from and just loved being a part of. I mean, I feel, very fortunate. Who can say 9 days out of 10 they enjoy going to work, enjoy what they do, enjoy the people they're meeting with? That's the case for me. I mean, yeah, I still have bad days and all of that, but for the most part, I love what I do. And so, yeah, have really tried to make the most of that.
Yeah, you mentioned what was going on with women's sport. You were working in marketing at Adidas in the 90s, and there was this huge moment around women's sport with the Women's World Cup in 1999. It feels like that was a cultural moment that has continued in terms of the focus on the power of female athletes, both on the field and from a marketing perspective. How do you think about what started then and sort of where we are in this trajectory around women's sport?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up that point, because actually I was doing an internship. So before I was finishing out my sort of college degree, and I got an internship at Adidas, I should say.
Adidas, sorry. My American pronunciation.
And the day I arrived was the day of the Women's World Cup.
Oh, wow.
In Portland, Oregon. And Adidas is obviously a huge soccer brand, and was very involved in that. So everyone was kind of obsessed. And growing up in the UK, I'm a big soccer or football fan. So I definitely leaned into it. But it definitely opened my mind to see a sold out crowd participate in an event like that, and then to have the women win in such dramatic fashion definitely left its mark. And actually, then when I did get offered a full-time job not long after at Adidas, I was focused on working on the tennis and soccer business. So got to meet some of those women and really understand what it's like to work with athletes and how you can build brands and all of that. So yeah, that was actually, quite a tipping point or eye-opener for me at that stage of my career.
So how did you get from working in marketing to running and having a background in tennis to running ski and snowboard?
Yeah, so it took a few twists and turns along the way. I worked for Adidas for a while, then I went to work for the women's tennis tour at a really exciting time under a guy called Larry Scott, who really transformed the organization and sort of the strategy for women's tennis. So to be a part of that, I think that sort of is what got my juices flowing around being at organizations that are really focused on growth and want to evolve in a major way. I've really leaned into that sort of with every opportunity that I've had. And then I moved into basketball. I worked for the NBA for quite a while, worked closely with David Stern and Adam Silver and various others. So that was an amazing learning experience. Then went to work for rugby and then a bunch of agencies, surfing. And then I ended up at U.S. Ski and Snowboard just over 4 years ago. So my first time working in snow sports. And yes, for sure, there are some differences, which everyone sort of tends to focus on the differences. For me, there are so many more similarities. So yes, technically these sports are different. How you bounce a basketball is different to, ski racing down a mountain. But the mental and physical preparation side for athletes, there are a lot of commonalities there. And the business side is even more similar. How you drive revenue through commercial sponsorships, broadcast, licensing, gaming, etc. Working with different stakeholders. I think, that's something I really pride on myself on, is being great at developing relationships, being persuasive, how to build consensus. And I've worked for a lot of organizations that have a lot of different stakeholders. Probably this one I'm working for now has the most, because we have 11 sports, a board of almost 30, a trustee board of 85. So there's a lot of stakeholder management. But look, that's what it's all about. That's how you get sort of the broader engagement and support. So look, for sure, I've learned a lot since I've been in this role, definitely about the very technical aspects of the sports. But I think my experience has also brought a lot. And sort of with each week, I feel it's more relevant. There's certain situations I get in, I'm like, hang on, this is very similar to something I experienced in basketball or tennis. And, what are the learnings there that I can apply here?
One thing that's really unusual about the ski and snowboard team is that the women's team has consistently outperformed the men's team in recent years. And it's not just about how they're performing on the slopes, it's also the impact that has on their endorsement deals. How do you see that playing out? I mean, this is really unusual to be able to have the women elevated at least at the same level as the men, if not higher, as someone who really cares about equity.
Yeah, look, I feel my timing's great. I mean, look, to be fair, we've had decades of dominance from some amazing women. I should note too, we've had some fantastic men and still do. I mean, our men achieved a lot this season, and I'm as proud of them as I am of our women athletes. But I think we have had a few very notable ones, especially recently, that have really transcended into other areas and are just such great role models. They have a great business head on their shoulders as well. They really lean into having a broader purpose and leaving a legacy, as well as, being the best at what they do in the world. So, look, I think it's very timely because the world is caring more and more about women's sports. So it makes us authentically just very relevant. It's not like we've got to pretend to lean into women's sports. We're there front and center. And I think it's how you use that for greater good, both to get more people participating and engaged in our sports, but also commercially. I think it's been a real advantage as we talk to different brands and organizations. It's something the world is caring more and more about, and rightly so. To be honest, it should have been happening for years, but now we can really walk the walk, and we've got case studies and examples. I think a level of credibility that people feel very comfortable with.
This seems to me like a valuable case study about where having high profile women who are making more than the men is a valuable thing for the business. And maybe it's not a zero sum game. And maybe other sports have been undervaluing the roles or the potential for monetizing the female athletes. I'm just thinking about the pay gaps and things like women's soccer and basketball. Like, these are massive pay gaps, even with the progress made.
Yep.
how could other sports like soccer or basketball, where there's been progress but still remain massive gaps, learn from the way your female athletes are so elevated?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And look, I think it's helped that we've had multiple of them at the same time. They've been able to collectively work on it together. They support each other. It also takes the pressure off a little bit because it's not like the spotlight is on one person all the time, which I think, then when you pile on the pressure of competing as well, it can become a lot. These are long seasons. Often they've already had long careers. And at some point, you need kind of that balance to be able, I think, to maintain it and just continue to be motivated and sort of cope with those sort of external forces. So I think that's been a real positive. I think, look, also a credit to snow sports. They've had equal prize money for decades. They were actually way ahead. Our organization for many years has had an equal number of male and female athletes on every team. It's just kind of a set criteria and requirement. And the fact that, these athletes have done well in the US has tended to embrace that equality, whether it's going back to Title IX, etc. Having said that, I would say, when you look at the more traditional partnerships that they have, there probably isn't quite the parity there. I think that is still quite male dominated. I'm not sure, in many instances, the top male and female are necessarily earning the same from, the core endemic brands. But when you look outside of that and the new brands that the female athletes are able to attract and how they're positioned not just as athletes, but much more broadly, I think that's been really cool to see. And that kind of goes from strength to strength, even now, where you see them written about in media or the content that they're producing, whether it's in fashion or other sort of key cultural moments, there's just this relevance and interest that I think we're really benefiting from. So, yeah, look, I couldn't be proud of how our athletes show up. And I think, look, a little bit of a plug for our sports too. While a lot of them do very well financially, they're still not making, the millions of dollars that a lot of other athletes are. So they are often thinking about their careers post-competition. Over 70% of our athletes have completed undergrad or in graduate school. They have internships. They know they need to build relationships in a different way. And so there's this humbleness and kind of just broader support that I think also is real, that brands see. It's different compared to maybe how some other athletes come across because, the situations are different. So that's natural. But I think actually in this day and age, that's been really welcomed.
And you've increased the number of female executives who work at the organization. Have you seen an impact on the business or an impact on the way things work behind the scenes?
Yeah, look, that sort of happened organically, to be honest. I mean, look, I always am going to want to give everyone a chance. And we have very thorough processes. We want as much diversity as possible. But look, I think especially my chief of sport, Anouk Patty, who's a woman, it's quite unusual to have a woman in that role. She actually comes from a very different background. She was in banking and consulting for many years, was a very good ski racer back in the day, but actually took a very different path and was working in Silicon Valley before I hired her. But for me, bringing the experience of someone that had an appreciation for our sports, but also was going to bring a level of professionalism and accountability that I felt we were crying out for. We need to keep upping our game, just like other sectors. And we maybe had become a little bit complacent and weren't quite as professional and cutting edge as I wanted us to be. And that was actually snow sports in general. Initially, I thought it was just our organization, but I think the industry at large has got, room to add that kind of thinking. So she's been brilliant. I mean, she's a real right hand for me, as well as, our other key executives. So it's certainly a huge team effort. I mean, you need all that support.
And that's a very female leadership quality to give credit to your team members. So to that end, I would ask you, what do you think your leadership superpower is? What do you think your key skill set is that's enabled you to drive so much change?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, I'm very collaborative. I do, like you just highlighted, I love being part of a team. Look, as a leader, you have to set a clear direction and really inspire people. I'm a high energy person, so I hope that sort of comes across and makes people want to follow and be part of what I'm leading and what we're creating here. I'm also a very open and transparent communicator. I don't really do politics. I think what you see is what you get, which I think people find quite refreshing. And I think, that helps you build relationships too. I think building that trust and, just support more broadly ultimately can, help lead to success and help people, want to follow a clear direction that they can be part of helping to achieve.
Well, we always like to ask before we wrap up life hacks. You have a very busy life. You're bouncing all over the globe. It seems like you're in a different city every week. How do you make it all work? Do you have any organizational tips, jet lag tips? What keeps it all the trains running on time?
Yeah. So look, I mentioned already, my personal and professional worlds kind of collide, which for a while I thought was a problem. Actually, I think it's a real strength, and I'm super lucky. So I have a lot of friends that I also work with. While I do sort of have some boundaries as well, and definitely I'm very close to my family, etc. So I think for me, though, the fact I get energy from what I do is great. I am religious about working out. I mean, that's how I manage stress. It's definitely how I manage jet lag. And it just, for me, keeps that balance. Even if it's only 20 minutes that I can sneak in, it's really important. When I haven't worked out for 2 or 3 days, I almost have too much energy and then bad things can happen. If you ask my better half, he would definitely vouch for that. So that's a key thing for me. And then look, when I travel, I'm a really curious person. I love to experience different cultures. I switch off by actually, seeing another part of a city and really sort of understanding what it's all about, which actually can often help in business, and you build relationships with sort of key other stakeholders as well. So those, I guess, are hacks.
That absolutely,
sure that's
absolutely.
special, but that's what keeps me going.
And just a final question about the future of women's sports. You've seen so many different parts of this broader sports industry, and there's so much attention on the WNBA and the new CBA, and this question about name, image, likeness, enabling college athletes to monetize, changing college sports. Where do you see this all going? What do you think the opportunity is for women in general? Do you think some of these changes, like around name, image, likeness, will siphon money away from other sports programs?
Yeah, look, I think the NCAA and the whole college situation with NIL is a little precarious for some of the smaller sports. But I think we'll end up in the right place. I think there's, a broader movement with the US OPC, some of the key universities that really care about sort of the broader student athlete opportunities. But, we need some strength of characters and some good negotiating skills to make sure that we find the right balance. But look, I think overall we're seeing it in most college sports, how the women's side of things is going from strength to strength, and that's replicating itself on the professional side. But we can't be complacent. I mean, we've seen leagues succeed and fail multiple times, and we can't afford those missteps. We need to keep this momentum going. And it needs to be sort of grounded in facts. Because I think I'm all for equality, but if it doesn't happen in the right, sustainable way, where the audiences and metrics really show the value that commercial partners, broadcasters, etc., can justify investing in, then I think, just peer pressure can sometimes lead to sort of bad outcomes. So look, I'm impatient, so I don't think this progress is quick enough, but I firmly believe it's only heading in one direction. So let's be strategic and smart about it. The recent CBA, that was obviously a really intense negotiation, took a long time, but they got to a great place, and, you've seen significant increases. So let's make sure that those work for the businesses, and when those discussions come up again, we can absolutely justify going to the next level. But yeah, I'm very bullish, and I think also really important to me, women's sports isn't about just appealing to women. We need everyone behind it. Look, I've been fortunate in my career to work for some great leaders, but have been as supported, if not more supported, by male leaders as I have by female leaders. So for me, we want everyone to embrace it. And I think that's an important distinction too. Women's sports certainly is not just for women. It's for everyone and all ages, all demographics. But yeah, I think the future looks very bright. I'm certainly betting on it.
So that's a good thesis for the future of women's sports. So what about the future for your business? What's your strategy to maintain momentum? I mean, you've been growing so much. I understand you're now looking at the potential includes skateboarding, which is another board like a snowboard. But where does your growth go from here?
Yeah, look, we've done a lot the last few years, but I really do feel like we're also only just getting going. I think there's still huge potential for us to further build these brands of our individual sports and our athletes. I think we can get more innovative on the content side. We're going to be adding more events. We are contemplating looking at some additional sports as well. And then there's other business lines. We talked a little bit about our travel and experiences business. We've launched a loyalty program as well. That keeps me incredibly motivated. If they'll put up with me, I think I could be here for a lot longer. And then we've got this sort of North Star in 8 years, having the next winter home games in Utah in 34. So I think that's a runway, populated by the Soccer World Cup this year. Then we've got LA 28. We've got, I think, a Rugby World Cup, another Soccer World Cup down the road. So it's quite a decade of sport. I do feel each of those events helps to build the other. I mean, we definitely felt sort of the Paris bounce. I felt the Olympics and Paralympics really came back in a big way in Paris. And I was hoping that would translate to Italy, and it did. And so I think, again, LA will do the same for us. And then people will be looking forward even more to 2034. So, we've got some tailwinds. We've for sure got some headwinds too. But look, that's, what keeps me up at night in a good way. The challenges, certainly don't become any less sort of complex, but, is balanced out by some amazing opportunities.
Yeah, so many opportunities. It's just been fascinating to watch you grow and expand, especially in the lifestyle stuff. It's so fascinating. Sophie, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us your ability to drive change in your leadership journey. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.